name's Aileen Milton, and I'm with the Village's Conservative Media and also with the Village's Tea Party. Welcome to What's Next Aileen. Today we have the privilege of being with Scott Feltman, and Scott is at the helm of a very successful organization called One Israel Fund. He's the executive vice president. He's been in that position since 2007. Scott was also worked in the Jewish nonprofit world since 1992 and originally worked as One Israel's Fund Director of Development. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, well, let me tell them a little bit about One Israel. One Israel Fund is a premier agency in North America which raises funds and provides humanitarian grants for the Jewish communities located in Judea, Samaria, and those formerly in Gaza. The projects range from preventive security and emergency medical equipment to building libraries, youth and senior centers, synagogues, and schools to educational scholarships for poverty relief. Since none of the major North American Jewish philanthropic organizations focus their efforts and many flatly refuse to support these areas in the area known as the biblical heartlands of Israel, One Israel Fund was created to fill those gaps. Is that about sums up?
It all.
Okay.
Guess we can end here.
Well, Scott, I am honored to be with you today, and tell me about yourself, and tell me what you're doing. And I understand you also, if you want to put a blurb in for, you have a gala coming up, don't you, in April?
We have a very big event coming up. Not only is it a gala, but it's our 25th anniversary gala.
Happy anniversary.
It's going to take place in New York on April 26th. There's a bunch of things I can't announce yet because we're still finalizing details, but suffice to say it's going to be a wonderful evening. We have some amazing honorees, and we're working on a real powerful guest speaker as soon as the Israeli elections conclude.
Yeah.
So I'm willing to be able to tell about that soon.
How many elections have they had this year? 3 or 4?
This is the third.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't know that it's going to be the last. That's the problem.
Yeah.
So
their system is a little bit different. Can you explain that, or?
Yeah. So in America, we identify as having a direct election for a president and direct elections for Congress. In Israel, it's a parliamentary system. So you vote for the party. And the party that gets the most votes is then given a mandate to create a government. So, for example, the Likud, which has been in power for the past number of years, received somewhere in the neighborhood, I think, of between 30 and 35 seats over the past number of elections. You need 61, because there are 120 seats in the Knesset, to form a government, a majority. So what happens is, after an election, the party usually that receives the most votes, but not always, the president determines. The president is an appointed position in Israel, the prime minister being the head government figure, basically makes a determination as to which of the parties he thinks will have the most success at forming a government. So in the last go-around, he went to Likud, headed by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, to attempt to form a coalition to get to at least 61 seats. And when he was unsuccessful, the president, Ruvi Rivlin, then went to the other party that received a significant amount of votes, which is headed by Benny Gantz, former head of the IDF, to see if he could form a government. And when he was unsuccessful, it then went to another election, and then subsequently to a third election. And that election is taking place upcoming on March the 3rd. And we'll see what happens. Actually, March the 2nd. Okay. And we'll see what happens.
They need to get stabilized in their elections too, in order to move forward.
100%. There's so many things right now being held up. It's called an interim government right now, so they can't pass new budgets. Allocations are to a minimum, and because nobody is in permanent position, so it's an interim government. We have a number of projects right now ourselves on a very small level that are somewhat being held up because of the lack of a government with permit approvals and funding approvals and things like that. So it's really crippling the whole country right now.
Yeah, I was wondering how, if they can't get a consensus over there, how it's affecting the One Israel Fund. Can you go in a little bit more detail?
Yeah, well, the first thing to understand is we're small potatoes in the grand scheme of multi-billion-dollar budgets. We raise around $5 million a year, but since a lot of our projects are capital building projects, and they exist in the areas of Judea and Samaria, which for your viewership may not understand that the areas of Judea and Samaria are not under Israeli law. And what I mean by that is when Israel recaptured the lands in 1967, which, by the way, were always inhabited by Jews throughout the past millennia, instead of applying Israel's sovereignty or Israel law, it was placed into, and for lack of a better terminology, but for an American audience, a martial law concept. So the IDF oversees everything that goes on in the areas of Judea and Samaria, and they rely on antiquated laws, some of them from when Jordan illegally occupied the area, some of them when Britain controlled the area, and some laws even going back to the Turkish Empire, the Ottoman Empire. And it's a whole mishmash of laws that are quite difficult to decipher and analyze and put all together.
And implement. You can't implement.
It is so difficult. If you want to add a bathroom to your home, and people have to understand, we're not talking about caravans and tents like most people envision. We're talking about beautiful, thriving communities with homes that would be indecipherable from your community in Florida or mine in New York. They're beautiful homes, and if you want to add a bathroom, you have to go through an enormous, crazy permit process, which oftentimes is rejected based on these antiquated laws. Does that cause the fees to go up for getting approvals? Extra fees, and for anybody in this country who understands bureaucracy, imagine our bureaucratic system times 10. So for us, we are in the midst of building a hospital in one of the regions. It's called the Binyamin region, named for the tribe of Benjamin, because that's where the area is. Mm-hmm. And we're building a hospital, which, interestingly enough, is going to service all the people living in the area, not just the Jewish community, but predominantly for them. But it will offer services that will be for the betterment of everybody. And it's held up right now in this crazy permit process because it's a major undertaking. It's a huge project. When it's all said and done, it's going to cost anywhere between $30 and $35 million to build.
Are you doing a joint venture with other people with this, or are you just contributing parts of it from One Israel Fund?
I missed part of the question.
Are you doing a joint venture with other people for? I mean, that's a huge project.
Right. So the regional council of the Benjamin region, Binyamin, is in charge of all the aspects other than the fundraising. So they are dealing with all of the permit process and the contractors and consultants and ultimately running the facility. Our role as a partner is the fundraising process. So we're well on our way in the fundraising area. But unfortunately, for the past 9 months, the project has been somewhat not in a state of flux, because I don't want to give the impression it's not happening, but it's just a much more arduous process. So we're waiting to get the final permits and land allocations done, and then, God willing, shortly thereafter, we will be able to start putting up a beautiful state-of-the-art medical facility, because today there are no medical facilities in the area. There are small, what they call terems, which are sometimes staffed by nurses, but nothing to the extent of having a proper medical facility with emergency and specialty care. And sometimes it could take over an hour for people to get from this area to the hospitals in Jerusalem, which, as anybody knows, can spell the difference between life and death.
Life and death, yeah. So these are more like small clinics that are existing now. Is that the way to describe it?
And they're not even staffed full time, so it's certain hours of the day, and it's not staffed all the time by medical doctors. So this will actually change the whole dynamic of the area. The area today is home to over almost 100,000 Israeli citizens, and when you take in all of the neighboring areas, it could be more than double that. So there's a serious need for it, and we're trying to address that need, which is what we do. We try to find gaps and fill them.
Well, that's what I mean. I live in the Villages, Florida, okay, and there's probably 150 to getting close to 200,000 people, and we have our own hospital here too. And
Right.
besides a lot of medical facilities, and I remember when I first moved here, there was maybe 10,000 people. You didn't need it, and you didn't need such a big place. But as our community has grown, our needs have also expanded, and the age of our community has also required more and more medical. Let me ask you this, Scott. If this is sort of being on hold or sort of a little bit being delayed, I guess is a better word, is that affecting your fundraising abilities at the same time? Are people getting frustrated because they're not being able to know a little bit more specific about when the project's going to get started?
So I'll divide the question into two.
Okay.
For our core donors who have been with us for the better part of 25 years, who understand the differences of building in Judea and Samaria versus building in Tel Aviv or Haifa, so most of them are fully understand and know what the process is and have been through this before. This is a little bit different because of the government situation, but it does take a long time to get everything together.
Right.
So from that standpoint, we have been raising money robustly for the project, and we're right now engaging in what we're hoping is going to be new donors. So new donors that are not 100% used to the process, so they have to be walked through the situation a little differently, and we've been doing that.
It's like everything else. We need to educate people.
Yeah, I mean, look, we exist to help what now is almost 460,000 Jewish Israelis living in Judea and Samaria. It's not the only areas that we do things, but it's our core focus for all the reasons you mentioned when we started. So it's a thriving, bustling area, which is growing by leaps and bounds, both by people moving in and wanting to move in, and also just by natural growth. So the areas when we started, when Winners Orphan started in 1994, there were approximately 110,000 residents. They were spaced out much more vastly than they are today. It also included the 21 communities in what was called Gush Katif in the Gaza area. And today it's 460,000 in 25 years. So you can imagine, the rapid growth.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, in America, we always hear about the negative. We hear about the terror attacks or the fact that they are settlements, and we know how they're vilified in the media. But if you go and visit the communities, and I encourage anybody that's coming to Israel to seek us out and come around with us, we run somewhere between 20 and 30 day trips a year. You will see a vastly different vision to what the settlement communities are. They're beautiful, growing communities. The quality of life, for the most part, it can't be compared to what life is like in the big cities.
Well, let me ask you this: who are your donations come? Are they from America, or a combination of are the Israelis and the people in the community also helping you raise funds, or what's your base? And also, sort of a second question is, how are we getting the younger people? If you've had people donating for 25 years, you're getting some old people.
Yes.
And so it's like any other, the rest of us, okay, that are in grassroots and actively, we're all getting a little bit more mature, let's say, and therefore how we engaging the younger people, especially the young Jewish community.
So I'll answer the first question. Our donor base is predominantly North American because that's where we're based. We do get contributions from around the world. I always laugh sometimes when we have one donor from Indonesia, which is the largest it's the largest Muslim percentage country in the world, and I have one donor from Indonesia, which I always take pride in. But for the most part, it's North American. Now, the Israeli side of things, so we are officially not a registered charity in Israel for various reasons, but what we do with our projects is many of them, in order for them to be approved for funding from One Israel Fund, the community themselves has to show that they have raised money towards things.
Okay.
We also rely heavily on government matching grants. So, for example, we're known for our security work. And we have been for almost the entire existence of our organization, because unfortunately it's a tough neighborhood that we work in, and security is very, very important. We do a lot of preventive security with high-tech infrared thermal camera systems. We've designed ourselves improved armored vests for the civilian security chiefs. Each community has their own team of security first responders, which has a head. It's called a Rafshatz. It's a security chief. He actually is the liaison between the IDF and the civilian security team in a community. We designed a revamped armored vest for them, and we gave them out after the last Gaza war in 2016. So security-wise, we get a lot of government matching grant money. So
from Israel or from the United States? Okay.
Yeah, from Israel. The Ministry of Defense takes notice of a lot of our projects, which is wonderful, and they will enter into, it's almost like a challenge grant, so to speak. Like for every 5, we did fire trailers after the arson attacks in 2017.
So what's a fire trailer? What's a fire trailer?
A fire trailer is it almost looks like a U-Haul that hooks onto the back of, let's say, a pickup truck or an SUV, and it basically is a water tank, because unfortunately in these areas they're not easily accessible and easily reachable by fire trucks. We don't have fire stations all over Judea and Samaria. So the first responders in a community are really responsible for dealing with all kinds of emergencies, fire included. And what happens is when you have a situation like we had with the arson attacks back in November of 2017, or even today down south in the Gaza envelope communities, where you have these terror kites and now balloons that are bringing these incendiary devices that are going off and starting fires in the fields, you need to be able to respond to it quickly. So the fire trailer is basically, it's a water tank. It's a high-powered water tank that you can drive to the area where it's needed and immediately deploy it into action and put out fires. So with those, the Ministry of Defense was matching. For every 5 communities we did, they did another 5.
Wow, that's interesting.
So we get a lot of matching grants from the government. Now, to take your second question about youth, so we do have a significant population that is, I don't want to say aged because my father's 94 and I'm about to turn 50, but we do have a population that is aging with the organization, and we a number of years ago made a concerted effort to reach out to the younger generation. We've had a number of young professional events, mostly in and around the New York area, because I'm not a very big organization. At the end of the day, even though we do a lot, we do it on a very small budget, and I have very little staff. I have one full-time person in Israel and one part-time person in Israel, and I have a small staff here. And we go around the country as much as we can, but from an event standpoint, it happens to be New York tri-state based. Although we did have a couple of events down in Florida over the past couple of years. We had one in Hollywood and we had one in Boca. I need to get up to Orlando.
Yeah, well, I'm in the Villages. Okay, you need to get up to the Villages.
I know. Now I have a connection.
Yeah.
And I'm actually meeting with a couple of young students next week who are involved in another organization called SSI, Students Supporting Israel, which is an organization on a number of college campuses. So I'm meeting with one of the heads in Columbia University next week, and I'm also meeting with her predecessor, who was the founder, because we're trying to focus on a even younger event in the future, and we're also trying to motivate them to come to the gala on April 26th, because it's always very heartening for my regular donor base when they see a large contingency of young, energetic, future donors. We're also at the dinner, we're honoring 5 students, high school students, for work that they've done with us, because we have a number of high schools that have done stuff with us, and that's very exciting for me.
That's great, and get those kids that you're now giving awards to or scholarships to, get them to create a program where they expand it for you within their own sphere of influence.
Absolutely, and also it helps us by reaching out to other schools to show them, look what this school did, you can do the same thing.
Absolutely.
So that's what we're hoping for.
Absolutely.
My vision for One Israel Fund is that we become an umbrella entity to help give them the support they need. So, and one of the things that we've been doing very successfully over the past decade is that, as you probably know, there are lots of Israelis that they think they're going to just, come to America and the roads are paved in gold and they'll just be able to show up and everybody's going to take out their checkbooks and just write out checks because they're so amazing. And they don't know how to speak English well, and their materials are put together where, half of it's misspelled, or the sentence structure is poor. And what we basically have been doing is meeting with a lot of them and going over and helping them develop their materials and develop their marketing plans so they can stand on their own 2 feet. Because, like I said, we're an organization, we raise, on average, $5 million a year, which is great. But we're certainly not on the same level as many of those organizations that everybody knows about. But if I can help 10 organizations a year that are doing wonderful work, for example, there's a whole system of projects called Mechinot. Mechinot are pre-army military schools. So they are for boys who are going to be going into the army, but they want to spend a year or more before they go into the army continuing their studies after high school, so that they're better prepared and they go into the army. It's an incredible thing, because most of them not only finish their compensatory military service, but they go on to become officers. Their connection is very, very strong. And there are quite a number of those programs that exist today in Israel, all throughout the country. And we have met with a number of them in order to help them develop their materials and their strategies. And, if they have 2 people and one speaks better English than the other, well, let's work with the one who speaks better English and bring him to the States to speak on behalf of whatever it is that they are in need of. And that's one of the things that we bring to the table that doesn't show up in our bottom line, but that we're very proud of, that we're helping all of these other organizations to thrive.
Well, that program you're talking about actually would work here in the United States too. Let's face it, a better educated soldier is a lot smarter and safer soldier, and can accomplish a lot more than somebody who's just has no life experiences at all and just is going into the military for, let's say, some of the wrong reasons. I'd rather have a little bit better educated soldier going in that's a little bit more mature and can make some better decisions. And I think a concept like that would, and we fight it. We fight our military, unfortunately, and don't respect our law enforcement as much as we should. And it's not good for our freedom or our liberty.
It's very painful for me. I am the son of a World War II vet. My father actually was just honored by the Veterans Association 2 weeks ago. He received an honor. He was inducted into what's called the Fort Chaplain Society, and it was a big celebration, and we were very proud. My father fought in the South Pacific. He was a tail gunner on a B-29 bomber.
Wow.
So I know what it is to appreciate the military and understand the sacrifice.
Well, we need to quit talking, Scott. I need to interview your dad.
Yes, you're not the only one that's asked. The problem is, at 94 years old, we're not even sure where the story is. The truth ends and the and the embellishment begins.
Well,
but he is so fascinating.
That's okay, because I just interviewed recently Irving Locker, who was World War II. He was at Battle of the Bulge.
Right.
He's 94 too. He's still ballroom dancing. He still goes around and talks. And he was the gentleman that was at Trump's State of the Union, not this last one. And a little short Jewish guy, cute, still married, been married 71 years. And I interviewed him, and his story is fascinating. And the truth is, we're losing those guys. So I would love to talk to your dad.
My father, actually, and if anybody's interested, you can actually Google his name, Stanley Feltman.
Okay.
They actually interviewed him for the National Archives with some of his stories. My father it's very interesting. He was shot down. His entire plane was shot down into the South Pacific during one of their missions, and they all survived. They also fed from the plane. So, yeah, he's got a pretty impressive story.
Well, I definitely would love to hear, because I believe in sharing those kind of stories, because we're losing them. And
yes.
we're losing our history. In fact, I'm going to film some people tonight, or later this afternoon. I'm looking at my clock. Later this afternoon on a movie that's coming out called Mother of Normandy.
Interesting.
And it has to do with letters that were written, I guess, from our military guys during the Normandy invasion. Now, that's about as much as I know. And I've also interviewed Anita and Chuck Undersea, who are producing a movie called Angels on the Battlefield.
Interesting.
Very, very interesting. It's going to be coming out soon. So I would love to talk to your dad.
Okay. I got to figure out how to set him up on Skype. I'm not sure if he would even know how, but we'll work on it.
And there's another gentleman in New York that I actually use some of his articles on our website, and you might want to consider having him come to see you. His name is Michael Cutler. And he talks on immigration. He was a former FBI agent. Of course, he went through what happened on 9/11 in New York. But he's Jewish and great guy.
Interesting.
And he fights from a different level. So and he's right there in your city.
I would love to meet somebody with that type of background. I have people in my organization that would just love to, engage with someone like that.
Okay. Well, we'll have to share some information.
Okay.
Let's get back to One Israel. So, what's your goal for 2020 and or even the next 5 years? And tell me more about your gala, or how do you, if you're in charge of fundraising, what are some of the things you do for fundraising?
So most of our fundraising, because we don't get a lot of grant money, is mostly individual private funding. We do have some events around the country during the year, and we're always looking for people who would like to spearhead a grassroots effort in their area. As much as my wife doesn't like it, I love traveling, so it's fine. So it's interesting right now. We're going through a very, very what's the right word for this? I guess the best word I can put is interesting times right now with this recent unveiling of the Peace Through Prosperity plan that the Trump administration has announced. And the reason being, and we talked about this earlier, is that part of the plan calls for Israel to apply Israeli law to most of these, if not all of these communities. And what it's important to understand is, by doing so, it will overnight improve the quality of life of everyone living in these areas. I'll give you a perfect example. In the areas that are under the Palestinian Authority, so there's a lot of corruption which is well documented. And one of the things that is very poorly done is garbage collection. We take it for granted. You get the garbage twice a week or 3 times a week or whatever it is. The sanitation department comes, picks up your garbage, and that's the end of it. So in the areas under the PA, garbage collection leaves a lot to be desired. So what happens is a lot of the Arabs burn their garbage. They literally take their garbage into the field and they'll burn it, and all of those toxins go into the environment, into the air, into the ground. And there's nobody to stop it. Another example is that...
Well, the truth is you don't know whether it's garbage that's being burned or something else is taking place either.
Correct. I mean, look, they certainly burn other things in anger, and they burn tires and all of those things, but to get rid of their garbage, a lot of times they just burn the garbage.
Right.
And with everybody in this country up in arms about the dangers of plastic, you can imagine what that's doing to the environment. Another area of concern is that there's very little policing on the roads. And I don't mean policing, for terror. I mean just basic policing. It's under the IDF. So right now, you have an entire area of a few million people living there, and the Army is in charge of the protection of the roads. So, the Army doesn't give out tickets. The Army doesn't stop people from speeding or running red lights or whatever the case might be. And a few months ago, in November, when I was in Israel, there was a terrible, terrible car crash. There's no reason to assume that it was terror, but it was a 19-year-old Arab boy who was driving. He was going approximately 95 miles an hour on the road, and he plowed through a car that was stopped at a red light. And there was a family in the car, and the mother and one of the children were killed instantly. One of the boys is going to be hospitalized, probably in some kind of a vegetative state for the rest of his life, and the husband was in a coma for quite a number of weeks until they eased him out and then had to tell him about what happened to his family. And there's nothing to stop that in these areas. So applying Israeli law will really benefit everyone living there. And trust me, people abusing the laws of the road are Israelis and Arabs combined. Israelis are known for their reckless driving just as well. So this whole concept of Trump's plan really changes the dynamic. It also changes the dynamic for work that we do. Because if Israeli law was placed upon these areas, so that will mean an incredible resource of funding that's made available for improving the roads, improving the quality of life. And there may also be funding for a lot of these projects that we've been trying to spearhead for many years. Certainly it will cut down on the whole permit process, because then in order to create a building project, like our medical center, for example, you would just go to the same zoning committee that they would in Tel Aviv or Jerusalem or somewhere else. Sorry. So it really has the potential to be a major impact on the work we do. Our goal is the same every year. And unfortunately, when you work in the areas of Judea and Samaria, it's hard to have 5-year plans because you just don't know how things are going to change and how it's affected from one administration in America to the next, and from one government in Israel to the next. So we basically look for projects that are quality projects that are going to improve the lives of as many people as possible, to make their existence safer, more secure, and to give the families that which they need in order to raise their family. He responded personally to over 100 active terror attacks. He was responsible for returning children to their families and parents to their children. He was involved in the most horrific period that probably Israel has ever known. And his vast experience, not only dealing with terror, but specifically dealing with counter-terror in the communities in Judea and Samaria, he is probably, and I say this with all honesty for myself, even though he works for me, He's probably the foremost expert in counterterror in Judea and Samaria today.
I'd love
His name
to
is Mark
talk to him.
Provisor. He has since returned to his art and is now actually going around the country speaking about how he fuses his art with his counterterror work, and how they're not opposed interests. They actually work together in allowing him to think out of the box and figure out solutions to problems sometimes where we are called in by communities to basically figure out how to deal with a situation. The story I love giving, even though it's a little bit outdated today, people may remember in March of 2011, there was a family named Fogel who lived in the community of Itamar, which were slaughtered in their home.
Yeah, I remember that.
We were contacted half a year before by the security team in Itamar because they had what was called probes going on in the fences around the community. Probes, for your audience, are basically would-be terrorists, usually kids, teenagers or young adults, who are sent out by terror cells to place IEDs. IEDs are incendiary improvised explosive devices on the fences. When they go off, so the security team responds, and they take notes. How many people responded? Which direction did they come from? How many, what did they bring with them in their response? How long did it take? And they take all that information back to their leadership. Yeah. And there were two areas in Itamar, because the community had grown over the years, that were no longer covered by the existing camera systems. So they asked us for help, and Mark visited the community, made a determination of what was needed, and came to America to try to raise money for such a project. And most people, it was quiet. They didn't want to hear it. It was like the boy who cried wolf. Oh, it's an organization coming, they're just looking to raise money. Even though every fiber of Mark's being is geared towards preventing terror. There's no fluff with him. He's not looking to make a buck. He wants to save lives. And we difficultly raised enough money for one camera system. And a camera system is not cheap. It can cost upwards of $100,000 even after a match. And we were able to put it in one of the two areas where these probes were coming from. And that area went quiet, but about a month after we put that system in, the attack came from the other location in the fence, and that's when the family was literally slaughtered.
Do you, I was, my background was property management, so a little bit, where you always were concerned about security. But sometimes putting up deterrents are just as successful as putting up the real things.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We tell people all the time that for every terror attack you hear of, there are hundreds that are thwarted. Now, most of them are thwarted by the IDF, which is patrolling all throughout the area with all of their resources. But our camera systems prevent terror. Sometimes we catch terrorists, and I have documented footage on my YouTube channel that people can actually watch actual terrorists being located, being sighted by the cameras. But on the flip side, some of these projects literally just deter them from coming to the community. So the more we're able to do, the less likely they are to try. And we also train the teams. We pay for training at certain training facilities that they learn certain counter-terror tactics. We upgrade the vehicles that they're given with different lighting systems. We actually started putting in this, it's a mobile thermal camera that mounts on top of the patrol vehicle that rotates 360 degrees and is linked up to their phone or their iPad or whatever they may have, both in the car and at the central monitoring station. So as they're driving, the camera is constantly taking infrared video outside, beyond the fence. So it gives us eyes way beyond where our families are that we're trying to protect. And the counter-terror work that we do is always going to be paramount. So, for anybody looking for what the plan is, I would love to be able to tell them that we're not going to need security anymore. that's my plan. That's my dream. That's my hope. That's my prayer. Unfortunately, the likelihood of that is slim. So we'll continue doing what we can in the realm of security and continue building the projects that we can to make families' lives safer and secure and give children the childhood that they so deserve. The Arabs are never going to agree to the conditions that have been placed upon them, which are nothing beyond what we would expect from any civilized nation in the world. So, the things being asked about, cutting out terror and cutting out their pay for slay, where they pay the families of terrorists, which encourages more terrorists. These are nothing, that we wouldn't expect from any nation of the world. But the media, for whatever reason, wants to portray it that if it seems to be positive for Israel, it must be negative for the Arabs, and it's simply not true. And whatever platform we can to get that word out, and to however many people we can reach, we try. Unfortunately, it's not my role to do that. My role is really on the ground, making sure that I'm doing my part to help the communities that are there. And there are people in far better positions to take that message, but you're fighting an uphill battle when our college campuses have been riddled with anti-Israel, anti-Semitic rhetoric.
Yes.
And the media also plays their role in always portraying anything that Prime Minister Netanyahu does must be negative, and anything that President Trump does must be negative, and anything that the pro-Israel community does must be a negative. And it's sad, but we just have to push forward. And this plan, while it's not perfect, and there are things that I may personally not be happy about, I would never be happy about creating a terror state in my backyard.
Right.
There are a lot of positives that have at least changed the narrative that could have far-reaching, potential going forward for these communities and their future. So, that's what we have to focus on right now.
Well, we definitely need to unite the Jewish community and the Christians, because they're attacking us too.
Absolutely.
And,
if not more so. There are more Christians being persecuted around the world today than anybody.
Yes.
It's an amazing thing that Israel's a democracy and gives equal rights to Arabs, Christians, Bedouins, Druze, Jews, everybody. And in the Arab world around them, the Arabs are literally slaughtering Christians and the Yazidis and the Kurds and Jews in Israel and all over the place, and even themselves. Muslim against Muslim, and yet the majority of the enlightened, and I'll use it in quotes, the enlightened Western world views Israel in the most negative of lights, and falls over backwards over the Palestinian Arabs. Yeah. And it always makes me laugh. You have people in the highest levels of government here, which are women, which are homosexual, which are all kinds of different things. Whether we agree with their lifestyle or not, they are defending a religion and a nation and a bunch of nations that they wouldn't last 5 minutes, in their countries. And Israel, which gives rights to everyone, which is the 7th or 8th highest ranked country in the world for women, are vilified by women who are running for the highest office in the land here and other countries. It just makes no sense. For our people not to understand, when I say our people, I mean the Jewish people, and probably the Christians understand it better sometimes than the Jewish people, that we need a homeland for ourselves, that if we are in fact deemed to be not welcome again somewhere, that there's a place for us to go. The percentage of people making aliyah, moving to Israel from parts of Western Europe over the past 4 or 5 years has grown exponentially because of the crisis going on there.
Yes.
And the amount of persecution. So it's disheartening that the overwhelming Jewish community here continues. I don't want to use the term of voting Democrat because I'm not taking sides with Democrats or Republicans, but to not understand the issues as it faces them, as an individual. A lot of, we have a history of trying to, always fit in the country we're living, and then finding out down the road that, they still identify us as Jews. Mm-hmm. It happened certainly in Germany in the last century, and it's happened to our history for all time. And they didn't care if we were Reform, Conservative, Orthodox, Ultra-Orthodox, Republican, Democrat, Green Party, or Conservative. When anti-Semitism exists, there's no logical, intellectual reason for it. It is a hatred that has been in the world, for thousands of years. So, it would be nice for more Jews to understand Israel. Unfortunately, especially the younger crowd, they don't remember Israel before it was a powerful nation. And they view Israel in relation to the Palestinian Arabs, as opposed to Israel in relation to the 23 Muslim countries that surround it, and for the better part of its existence, have wanted to see it destroyed. So someone like me sees Israel as, David in its battle versus Goliath, but unfortunately a lot of the young college-age Jews view Israel as Goliath against little David. And I think that's a huge perception difference between those of us who are more conservative in our views and more pro, I'm using the term pro-Israel, whatever that means, but more supportive of a strong nation-state of Israel, as opposed to those, today that identify differently. But in the Middle East, it's all built on
survival.
On what?
Survival.
Survival, but also they make alliances based on what's most beneficial to them. It's not an area that's ever become. Yeah, it's not. They're not going to become friends.
Right.
But if Saudi Arabia realizes that Israel, as much as they may hate Israel, and there are plenty of people in Saudi Arabia and Egypt that hate Israel, but the governments realize that they need Israel in order to stand up to Iran. And it's not like Saudi Arabia and Egypt are sitting there fearful that Israel is just going to one day, turn around and decide to take bombs and shoot them into their territory. Nobody's ever worried about that. But they are worried that if Iran gets a nuclear bomb, that they will. So in order to be able to stop that, they have come closer to Israel, which is an amazing, paradigm shift in the Middle East, that Israel has uniquely made alliances with a number of Arab nations, some of which they had peace agreements but never really a peace, and some that they never had peace agreements that are now working together in order to thwart the rising power of Iran. And Iran has, it's not just Iran's territory. Iran now controls large parts of Syria and Iraq and Yemen, and in order to push back on that, they all realize that Israel is a major resource in that, and it's created alliances that have never existed before. But they never cared about the Palestinian Arabs. It was always an opportunity to use them as a pawn against Israel.
Well, so, we have pawns here in the United States too, don't we?
Yes.
Yes.
Look, every nation has things that they use to their benefit, but unfortunately, you have an entire people in Israel that have been basically thrown to the side of the road and used and abused for generations, and it's sad. I feel bad for them as well.
Yeah.
And if there are a number of government officials in Israel, Nir Barkat being one of them, Naftali Bennett another, Ayelet Shaked, who very much want to help build economic opportunities for the Palestinian Arabs. And that's not to say that they all, want to, live in a Pollyannish society alongside Israel in friendship. They don't, not all of them. But there are a lot of Arabs who just want to basically provide for their families, provide a better life.
They're changing their thinking too. They don't need to live. They're changing their thinking too, in that they don't want to live like what took place 2,000 years ago. There are no more understand it than we understand some of the things that's happened in history.
The unemployment rate in the areas under the PA in some demographics are over 50%. There are 26,000 Palestinian Arabs today that work in the industrial zones in Judea and Samaria. Nir Barkat has a plan that he wants to bring that to 250,000 in the next 10 years and give lots of opportunities. We didn't even talk about the whole BDS movement, the boycott, divestment, and sanction movement, which is a whole different issue, but it hurts the Arabs sometimes more than it hurts the Jews. The UN just published a list of 112 companies that do business in Judea and Samaria. The UN Human Rights Council, which is kind of a joke when you see some of the nations that sit on the Human Rights Council.
Yeah, I agree.
But you have a situation where they want to boycott 112 companies that are bringing prosperity and economic opportunities, many of them to the Arab communities as well.